Recording in progress. Do you want to describe shared imaginal practice?
Shared imaginal practice for me is a method to access the subconscious mind that really starts with being embodied and requires a communal element. It requires you to be present with others, and is surprisingly effective even over Zoom. And creating that safe space to be together free of judgment. And you start getting embodied. And when you do so, you are accessing sensory information. The person leading will ask questions using sensory information, like where do you feel that in the body? You pick a concept and you say, where do you feel that in the body? And you start to then go from there into the imaginal space, asking questions like, does it have a color or a texture or a shape? And through this method, I find it's a really powerful doorway into the unconscious mind that you may be disconnected from that part of you that is constantly processing information all the time and accessing story, accessing narrative in the universe, in your daily life. And has a lot to tell us.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, I think one thing I'm struck by, I guess, like with you particularly, you get such strong and such clear like images and stuff coming through. And to me, it almost feels like there's like a thing, there's like a cultural thing, I don't know what you call it, fact that we have five senses. And then it's like, but in imaginal practice, it's almost like they're not the normal five senses. You're sort of like in a different realm. I don't know how you relate to that, whether that feels true or...
I think it's that you are disconnecting from the, shall we say, the literal material reality, and going inward. And you're still connected to those senses, and it is the job of a guide, I think, to connect a person with their senses, but it becomes internal and I suppose unhindered by the laws of physics. I don't have anything sensible to say about what the scientific basis is for this area of consciousness, but I think it is arguably connecting with that internal space that is essential for spiritual practice.
Yeah, I like that. It's like the senses when they're turned inwards rather than out into the world.
Yeah, because I think the senses are the senses are literally how we engage with reality. But practitioners of, shall we say, physiotherapy, certain physiotherapies, will talk about the sixth sense being not the spooky woo-woo Bruce Willis one, but proprioception, the sense of inside your body, because touch is actually limited to the skin. But there are two additional sort of components of that, which are pressure and proprioception, the feeling inside your body, what's going on inside your body, and what's called the kinesthetic sense, the sense of the motion of your body in space. So I think that one, imaginal practice connects us more to proprioception in a way that we're usually not aware of. And this is also the great strength for me of yoga as a practice. And that's been so healing for my personal trauma, because trauma in general, but particularly intense relational trauma, disconnects you from the body. It disconnects you from your nervous system and dysregulates your nervous system. So being able to inhabit that proprioceptive sense in a safe environment and maintaining mindfulness of that is both the strength of yoga and imaginal practice. It's just that shared imaginal practice is not a physical discipline. So one, it's getting you in touch with that proprioception and that pressure. But two, the senses are literally how we engage with the world, and so our entire imagination is built upon them.
Yeah, nice.
so it allows us to take those and see something different with them.
Yeah. I'm also struck by when you were saying that like our sense of time is another sense, isn't it? Time passing. And imaginal practice also, it almost like takes that away in an interesting way, puts you in a different time realm, which is
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
And then there's another thing which is like, it's almost like each person, as I do more and more of this and work with people with guiding and things like that, it's almost like each person has a, when you said about the sixth sense, it's almost like there's like a soul sense, which is people, what is it? It's like people receive the world and receive others in their own unique way. And then it's like, as you really tune into what that is and really refine it and just like get all the other stuff out the way, it's like it's like people have a sort of special talent. Everyone has like a special like talent or a unique kind of style that they bring to the guiding and bring to their own thing, which is um yeah, it's kind of like engaging with the unseen, what's like under the surface. And it's almost like people pick up on different stuff. And an example of what I mean is like when you walk into a room and you're like, it's cozy or something. It's almost like when you're engaging with a person, it's like you're picking up on information from them. And it's
it's
like each person gets different information. It's really fascinating.
yeah. I mean, I would say it's an energetic sense, because I was, as you were saying that, I was trying to puzzle out what I would regard as what you refer to as a soul sense. And I think engaging with others is like simultaneously energetic and emotional.
Mm-hmm.
But also the nervous system comes into play, because I talked about nervous system dysregulation before. So yes, we do pick up the nervous system thing is our pattern of established experiences that we then use to decode future experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's partly how you're reading somebody, but then there is energetic information, and personality also comes into it. How you're guiding and what your motivations are also seep into that energetic communication. So yeah, this is where we're getting quite like woo woo and
Yeah, totally.
but I do think increasingly I as someone who is both scientific and artistic and spiritual, like I come from a scientific background, I do increasingly find that energy, in so much as it's not really a tangible, measurable thing, but a very clear part of our experience, is the thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's the thing.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, it's the most important component of music performance. It's the most important component of engaging with other human beings. It's the most important component. I did a logo design last week for somebody, and the way that I used to do illustration my whole life was very brain heavy, very like frontal lobe heavy, analytical, thinking too much, worrying too much, perfectionism. And the thing that I really captured in this logo design that was very different to what I've done before was, instead of methodically mapping out, and only doing a couple of versions of it, I covered pages and pages of prototypes.
Mm.
And and it was about the flow, and it was about the motion of my arm, because it was in a style that needed to be like spray painted or brushed. And I knew that I'd nailed the one that I wanted, and that turned out to be the one the client liked the most. So I was happy with that. Synchrony was, the energy was just there, the energy of the motion through the hand, and you can see it. So energy is observable through the outcomes. Energy, and this also relates to music, because I saw this great quote which I've stolen, and of all places I saw it on TikTok, which is someone relating that their piano teacher had told them that you're not playing an instrument when you're performing, you're playing energy. And this is just, I think this is a game changer. So I've gone off on one there, and I've gone into like the creative sphere.
Yeah, I
But this
love
is
it. No, it's
why,
amazing.
yeah, this is why I'm so intent now on the importance of this intangible thing called energy, and treating it seriously and taking it seriously, instead of succumbing to the associations of woo-woo stereotypes about, it's about the energy, man. And like I find that this is a line that I tread in my life as someone who is owning being both spiritual and scientific.
Yeah, amazing. I love this. Yeah, I've walked the same path as well. I used to be really aversive to energy stuff when I was younger, very scientific materialist.
Mm.
Now I'm like all about the energy. Yeah, it's just like clearly the thing that, yeah, it's clearly the thing that's creating it, and it's all about that. And yeah, it's interesting. I love that it feels like particularly anything creative, imaginative, that's just like intrinsically linked to the energy side of things.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's something important in what you were saying about the nervous system thing and the energy side of things, because when you're in the parasympathetic, in the green as I call it, then you're like open and you're relaxed and you're kind of just taking in information, and like yeah, you're not like narrowing down and saying, oh, it's this thing or it's this thing. When you're
Yeah.
in the red, in the sympathetic, in the red that I call it, then you're basically often wrong about experience, because you're freaking out and just going into like survival mode of like it's this, it's this, it's this.
Yeah. Well,
And I
fight,
think,
flight, freeze, or fawn.
yeah,
And the tricky thing is that when it comes to intuition and instinct, if you have trauma, your instincts are not always right.
yeah,
And it's hard to access your intuition because you have this dysregulation.
yeah.
It's a tricky one, because I think we also, learning to trust ourselves is an essential component of recovery. And that includes not just jumping to, oh, my instincts are wrong about this, or jumping to thought that, because you kind of have to strike this balance of, okay, my instincts are telling me this. A lot of the time that will still be correct.
Yeah.
And so when you're trying, this is particularly difficult because you have to have that arm of subtlety, and not just jumping to, oh, I'm wrong about everything, because that's not going to help your recovery.
Yeah.
But also the instincts might still be keeping you safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also, there's like the subtlety of different situations call for different, yeah, it's like understanding the subtleties of listening to the cues more, being able to see the cues, like
Yeah.
not be pulled
Yeah.
around by them. And I think
And I think,
this is where shared imaginal practice is, well, this is one of the things that I think it's most good at, is giving the opportunity to revisit instincts and intuitions and like recreate a healthy relationship with them, not through force and deciding like, oh, this is right and this is wrong, but just by allowing it to come up in a situation that is safe. Then you get an opportunity to like look at it again and think, maybe I can let go of this coping mechanism now, or maybe I can see this coping mechanism for what it is and appreciate it and value it, and rather than think it's bad or something.
yeah, and shared imaginal practice is good practice for letting go of control, because it can be very tempting for me to want to be in the driver's seat. And I know, and I always lean into the fact that the most effective and powerful way to do shared imaginal practice is knowing you're safe enough to relinquish control and allowing things to come up. allowing emergence, because it's when you're trying to control it, you're not really accessing the subconscious mind, which has a lot to tell you, sometimes genuinely literally tell you. Once you've been into that, you're in that imaginal space, and we for anyone watching, a thing we like to do towards the end is ask, is there anything else that this image or this moment wants to tell you? And that is the most effective moment for a literal intervention for the unconscious mind to tell you something in words, not just interpreting symbolism.
Yeah, it's really powerful, that, isn't it? It can really give you something to take away that's super important.
Yeah.
And nice. Do you want to talk any more about, like, I feel like your capacity for detailed imagery is incredible, and I don't know if you feel that you can talk about that or want to talk about that, or if
I was very interested in symbolism for a number of years before getting involved in imaginal practice, and yes, at risk of using the word esoteric, also, a large amount of esoteric knowledge. I was also interested in interpreting as an artist and an observer, not engaging in that world as a practitioner, shall we say, of dark arts. But I found symbolism very compelling. And the thing that surprised me the most about imaginal practice was my own lexicon of symbolism, discovering my own vocabulary of symbolism that exists there all the time. There's this, I mean, if we're getting into deep territory, there's the idea of the collective unconscious, which symbols do tend to replicate across. But it is my opinion that part of the reason that these replicate across is purely cultural reinforcement. And that there are certain archetypal qualities that we do all dial into, and maybe this is just me in my mind, and I'm always trying to be aware that my experience of the world is not, isn't necessarily archetypal, isn't necessarily reflective of a majority, but I just find so much breadth in that vocabulary, and I find it so fascinating, and it gives me a new relationship in a very joyful way with this thing that I've already been interested in symbolism, and relating it back to myself. And symbolism as a language, and I mean, it's always really nice to learn a new language and a way of engaging with the world, just like music, or just like literal languages.
Yeah, it's super nice. I agree. I think there are some cultural things across symbolism, but it's very much unique to each person and collective. And I think a really nice example of this, often like energy will, if we practice together, like energy stuff will come up. But like one of the things you get a lot of, was it zoology that you studied, or?
Yeah, so for anyone watching, I have a bachelor's degree in zoology, but I'm also a trained musician. So yeah, you're going to say I get a lot of birds.
Yeah, really specific birds, which is lovely. I love it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it's this really nerdy component where I can't just have an owl. It'll be an eagle owl, or a long-eared owl, or a very specific kind of owl. And I haven't had birds pop up in my imaginal practice for maybe half the time I've been doing it. It was that first 6 months, it was a particular kind of woodpecker, or the woodpecker was the one that stood out for me the most, because it was the first one.
Yeah.
And I can't remember which other birds have popped in, but they have.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's kind of, it's almost like a nice expression of how everyone has their own unique inner world that they're like tuning into, and it's coming online. And then I think maybe on an energetic level, it's like then you're getting closer to this more like collective space. It's like when things become a bit more just sort of like fluid and loose, then it becomes more collective, maybe less specific. I don't know if that's true, just popped into my head then.
Yeah, I mean, there's the interactive quality that like other people are experiencing your practice as witnesses or as guides when it's happening, and then you're feeding each other's in a language as well. It's like what getting to watch a film or a video game, I think.
Yes, yeah, totally. And one thing that's really nice is when we share images afterwards in the group, and people are like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was imagining when you were describing this or when you were doing that. It's really nice when you can like corroborate the crossover and people. Yeah, nice. Okay, anything else that feels important that wants to be shared about it?
I think it's important to also share that the way that we operate with imaginal practice is a very anti-elitist space, very non-hierarchical, and the whole point is there's no such thing as getting it wrong. And the reason that's essential is because, one, it helps people to feel safe, and two, it helps people to feel out their kind of natural inclinations in the practice, because not everyone is a highly charged, like not everyone has a highly charged visual sphere, right? Not everyone has the level of kind of detail that some visual detail that some practitioners have. And I've noticed that some people react to time and space differently in their practices. And so the point is also by being able to occupy different roles as a witness, as a guide, as someone who's being guided, you also test out those inclinations. Some people like me are very geared towards taking it into a slightly therapeutic space, not trying to be a therapist or something, but asking questions and helping people connect deeply with things that might be challenging them, and connecting with their inner power and an outlook, an empowering outlook, instead of like a victimization outlook, for one example.
Yeah, no, that's really, really nice. I think in a way it's the most important thing, the like non-hierarchical nature of it, and the people and the all of your experience being welcomed in, because there's a way in which this practice could be done. Like when I've read things before and it's like, oh, like, can you give this a shape? Can you give this a color? There's a way in which that is done in a slightly like passive aggressive sort of like trying to manage your experience kind of way that always used to like wind me up a bit with practice. And it's like the opposite of that. And you can't, the thing is that can't be communicated in writing. It's like just it's the energy of what's present that is like accepting and welcoming. And it's actually by having the energy of holding space for the other person's experience, whatever that is, it cuts through that passive aggressive, like you're trying to control your experience. It's the absolute opposite of that. It's like gifting someone their experience as it is in its fullness, whatever is there. And that's really the power of it. And yeah, it's like the like you say, the therapeutic nature of it. It's kind of, and I love how you put it, like the empowering therapeutic nature of it. It's like you're gifting someone their experience, just saying like whatever's there, bring it. And then meeting that with like compassion and curiosity, and those two are
and a lack of judgment. And it's you're inviting, I think what the singular strength of this practice is, you're inviting people to learn how to trust themselves.
Yes.
And not everyone's in a space where that's easy. But it does require you as a leader, as a guide, to let go of trying to control, which is what you were just talking about. You really have to, sometimes you're inviting, and you might invite, is there a color or is a shape? And when the person isn't necessarily connecting with that, then you have to be flexible enough to see where you can go. And sometimes people don't need to be in the highly detailed imaginal realm. Sometimes people just need to be in the space of shape and more amorphous qualities of light and light and shade. That's happened in practices that I've guided. So yeah, flexibility is also part of it. It's not just a rote passive aggressive, as you said, and then you're getting annoyed when there's no color and shape, and then you don't know what to do with yourself, like as a guide.
Yeah, it's funny. It's just like hanging out, isn't it, in this really cool space where there's you can't get it wrong. Anything goes. Ultimate freedom, and we're just gonna hang out there and do some cool stuff in your experience.
With curiosity and instead of like directive.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. I suppose one of the challenges, though, of shared imaginal practices is because we're opening up these spaces in a non-judgmental way, it can go really deep and really dark.
Mm-hmm.
And that has kind of emotional consequences for everyone involved, I think. So that is one of the challenges. So it does require a great deal of emotional maturity from everyone involved.
Yes.
But I do think that the things we've already spoken about the kind of space you're engendering, help bring that about.
Yeah, totally. And it's a part of the being in the green and the parasympathetic and being explicitly connected to the body, like you said right at the start, the embodied nature of it is that you it doesn't push people past their limits because they're connected with their body. So if, for example, overwhelm starts coming up, then you start working with the overwhelm, and that's okay. And that is a signal to like not go further. If fear starts coming up, you can start working with the fear.
You can make a choice as the person participating to then dial it back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like the part of the empowered nature is listening to those signals and listening to the body and understanding like what it wants and not pushing it over the edge.
Yeah, and knowing that you still get to exercise that sovereignty over self.
Yeah.
Even if that means interrupting a practice.
Yeah, nice. But yeah, I agree. It goes to some pretty deep places for people, which is nice. And I don't think I've ever experienced it where anyone's like regretted that. It's definitely hit some deep places for people, but it feels like it's always been held thus far. So that's nice.
Shared imaginal.
Sorry.
High-pitched squealing noise begins. I fall over and
we're doing well.